Welcome, everyone. You found Sanctuary's Coffee and Conversation Show. My name is Myrna Haskell. I'm executive editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online publication for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, philanthropy, health and wellness, culture, and community. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. Today, my guest is Jocelyn Davis. She is an internationally known author and speaker, and she's recently written the book Insubordinate 12 New Archetypes for Women Who Lead. And I have to tell you, Jocelyn, I just love the book. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks. Great to be with you, Myrna.
Okay, so before we dig in, I just want to let listeners and readers know that we did excerpt your book in our March issue. So, listeners, you can find that in our book excerpt section, which is always linked also each and every month to our homepage. So it's easy to find. But I implore you to go and take a look at it because it's extremely interesting, and it's particularly for women leaders. But today, no surprise, we're going to be talking about archetypes and women leaders. And so I wanted to dig in a little bit to start on how you arranged these new archetypes, we call them, right, Jocelyn, so that they represent the contemporary woman leader.
Right. Yes. Great question to start with. When you say new archetypes, what I like to say is that these are very old archetypes, but also new. And they're old in the sense that they're drawn from legend and literature from long, long times ago. Great stories of great women leaders from legend and myth. But nobody until now has taken them and arranged them, pulled them out and arranged them in this way that is helpful to women leaders of today. And the way that that I think they're helpful is that for so many, centuries, women have been tagged with these negative labels, or they've been made negative. So things like the witch, the snow queen, the Amazon, the temptress. There's all these stereotypes that have been used to really malign women. But if we look more deeply into where these archetypes came from and what they can really sort of bring out in us, we see that they're so much more than stereotypes. They really are ways to understand our strengths more fully and in a way that can take us beyond the cliche of lean in.
Okay.
So this book really sort of tries to help us expand our view of women's strengths and women's leadership beyond that very sort of linear view, which is fine, by the way. I love Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In. But it's very limiting. It can be limiting for women to just be told, well, you just have to lean in and, be direct and be more, use your willpower and, kind of fight. That's fine sometimes. But a lot of us women, that's not our strength. And
Right.
frankly, we're kind of tired. We're kind of tired of leaning in.
Yes.
So looking at these archetypes is a way to expand our view of all the ways that we can lead and all the ways that we can succeed.
Yes, and that's why I found the book so interesting, because there's so many different personalities too, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that one is maybe better than the next, but I found, and I came out, just so that you know, earth, water, which I found really interesting because I was looking, I guess I was saying in my own mind that they were subtypes, mother bear and some of the other types. But I guess it's all just part of the description, the more detailed description of what it really means to be earth, water, right? And so I wanted the part of the question that I wanted to ask you about, though, is once we know what our archetype is, how can we use that information to become a better leader or to improve our professional path?
Right. Yeah. So there's two main ways that I see the knowledge of our archetypes as being helpful. First, I think it's important to realize that I believe we all have kind of a home archetype where we're most comfortable. That's our comfort zone.
Oh, I like how you put that. Yes.
Yeah, so it's not so much a box or limiting us to, well, you are the mama bear or you are the amiga only. It's that's your home. That's where that's your base camp. So one way to grow professionally by understanding your archetype, your home archetype, is to understand how that archetype can bring out your strengths, how to sort of enter into that archetype more fully. So, for example, as the mama bear, which would be potentially one of your home archetypes if you're in that earth water quadrant, the mama bear is the woman who is very good at leading through her kids, so to speak, which could be her team or her employees, or it could be her actual kids, metaphorically speaking.
Right.
So the mama bear is an excellent manager because she finds her success through others. She knows how to lead through others and bring them up and sort of teach and coach them.
Finding their strengths, right? To make it
Exactly.
better for everyone. That's that whole collaborative thing I was kind of sensing. Was I right about that?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So the mama bear sees people's strengths and knows how to bring those out and lift those kids, so to speak, up. And she finds great satisfaction in doing that. So if your home archetype is earth water or specifically the mama bear, you can if you understand that, you can see that as a real strength, as a leadership strength, not just, oh, you're kind of I don't know, the stereotypical mama bear who's very defensive and very bossy. But you can understand these are the strengths. Looking at the stories of mama bears that I've included and looking at real life mama bears today, you can lean into those strengths. But then the other way that you can grow professionally is to understand the other less comfortable archetypes that you have within you and that you can tap into and grow into those other areas that I believe we as women especially really have a much wider range than we give ourselves credit for.
I agree with
And though
you.
we may be comfortable in one zone, one archetype, we're very well able to tap into the full range of archetypes and use those for our own growth.
Can I ask you this, Jocelyn? So in the earth water, just with sticking with because I had done the quiz. So there was mama bear, I'm forgetting the three types, but there were three sort of like subtypes, if you will. I'm not sure what you
Yeah,
call
there's
them.
Mama Bear, Amiga, and
Yes.
Mesmerist are the three in that quadrant.
So have you found, well, I actually want to expand on this a little bit because I also want to ask you about how you came up with the questions for the quiz because they were excellent. But just for the first part, so these subtypes, because I did see myself a little bit in each of them. Is it typical that if you fall in a certain part of the quadrant that you are going to have a little bit of each of those subtypes, or is it all over the map? Like some people like just really stick to one sort of personality leadership style.
Yeah.
What have you seen, I guess, in those who have read the book and who you've studied?
Yeah, great question. It really is all over the map, and I have been surprised in as I go around and speak and lead workshops on this topic, how diverse people are, women especially in their leadership styles. So for me personally, for example, I find myself very solidly in one archetype, which is the Snow Queen, which
Okay.
is up in the air, sort of the
Yes.
airy side of things. So I resonate very, very strongly with the Snow Queen, and that it helps me to have become even more aware of that in writing this book, because I know that just sticking to that one archetype can limit me in some ways.
Can you
And
tell our
also it
listeners a
can,
little bit about what that is, a few adjectives for what that particular archetype is?
yeah. So that the Snow Queen is her main strength is that she's very cool-headed. She's quite analytic. She's often quite introverted. likes to sort of rise above conflict and
Okay.
sort of keep a cool head and sort of look down on all the mess.
That's a good
Um,
thing.
all good
We've all been
things, right?
there. It's
All
easy to
good
get caught
things.
up, right? When that's
Well,
happening.
this is something that is as as I said earlier, if you know your where you're most comfortable, and what your main archetype is, then you can, you know, lean into those strengths, so to speak. And that's helped me a lot in the past as a leader. But there are also downsides to being a snow queen. For example, snow queens hate to be wrong.
Okay.
They tend to have sort of a perfectionist complex,
Okay.
and that can get us in trouble. It's certainly gotten me into trouble when somebody has triggered me basically by saying, you know, oh, well, you know, you never think you're wrong, or, you know, oh, you're, you know, why are you always trying to be so perfect? So what I did in my career when and I didn't phrase it this way because I hadn't, you know, way back, I hadn't thought about this in terms of these archetypes, but I was aware that I was very, you know, quite introverted, cool, analytic. But in my business, in my company, in order to advance and succeed, I really needed to do some things like present and facilitate workshops and be on stage,
And
which
that
was not
brought you out,
comfortable
I'm
for me.
sure. Practicing that, right?
Exactly. And so I had to think about, all right, how am I going to handle this? I can't just sort of magically transform myself into an extroverted, sparkly, you know, sort of salesy type of person. But what I can do is use my strengths as a snow queen. That is the ability to prepare, the ability to really rehearse and know my topic really well. And I can also kind of look around and see, what are these other women doing? What are some of these other people who are not like me but are really successful? How are they doing it? Oh, well, she's very, you know, this is how she gets up on stage and how she talks to people when she's doing a presentation. Maybe I can pick up on some of that. So I sort of naturally, I think, intuited this concept of, you know, in order to be authentic, you don't have to just stick to one thing. You can
Right.
tap into these other ways of leading.
And when you are, and I heard you say when you do use what you know are your strengths too for something that scares you, really dig into what are my strengths. And I don't have to be exactly like this other person. Maybe this other person is really successful and their style and their approach is way different than mine, but it doesn't mean that mine won't work either, though, right?
Exactly. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean
that's
mine
that's
will
why I think
either.
this is such a
Yeah.
good book because it really digs into all of that. I think having
Mhm.
the understanding of what everybody else is doing, and maybe even when we're hiring our team, right? Now we
Mm.
know where we're falling back, and we can hire those that have strengths in those areas that we don't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And it's so often this is another uh, aspect of being socialized as a woman in this society that I think can hold us back, which is that we often are inclined to sort of look down on or be snarky about people who have other strengths, people who represent other archetypes. There was one woman at my old company who was a temptress. She was that was her archetype, which doesn't mean that she was you know, like a temptress in the sort of negative sense of being, you know, overly sexy or something. It just meant that she was very extroverted.
Mm-hmm.
She made other people feel like stars. She would, you know, really give you all of her attention and feel like you were really special in her eyes. And she was very fun. And some of us, I remember myself included at the time, kind of looked askance at her and said, you know, well, you know, why is she acting that way? Like that's not really appropriate, or it's not really professional. And we were sort of snarky about it. But she was really smart, very successful, very she was the our head of marketing at the company, and she was fantastic at it. And looking back on it, I would have done much better to like look at her and say, oh, she's different from, she's approaching this differently from how I would. Let me try to learn from that and appreciate what she's doing.
Well, I know that you have experience in research and development, so that brings me back to my interest in how you came up with this quiz, because I know a lot about what's going to help people when they read this is that when they take the quiz, it really fits them where they need to be on the wheel to understand who they are. And I felt, at least in my circumstance, it did really fit my leadership style. That I was shocked by that. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit how you came up with the questions.
Sure. I mean, it's really a mix of two things, as the book is. So I did a lot of research into, really, it's Carl Jung came up with the concept of archetypes, and sort of applying them to psychology. And so there's a lot to be learned from Jungian archetypes. There's also a lot to be learned from what Jung didn't look at, which is sort of the wider range of these legendary women from a wide range of cultures. So in the book, I talk about legends of women from East and West and, all around.
Our audience will love that.
Yeah. I let some of the stories from India or from China are just fantastic, and not so well known in the West. So there was that in my research, and then frankly, the rest of it was looking at women that I actually knew, whether in business or in a more personal life, outside of the business world, and really analyzing how they achieved what they achieved, what were their strengths, and how did those play out in different difficult situations. So all of that, folded into the book, and then I, came up with the quiz.
Okay. Well, I know you touched upon this a little bit earlier in the conversation, but I was interested in this idea of suppression of certain archetypes, that we do this probably subconsciously, right? But how that could work actually if we don't do that, or, well, I'll let you explain it, in our favor in terms of growth. Because I think I hear what you're saying, that we have a home or a comfortable archetype, but that doesn't mean that we can't dig into some of these others or find something that might work for us, I guess, in some of these other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because since writing the book, I've sort of expanded my own view a little bit of how these archetypes interact with each other. And one interesting thing to think about is the ones that are opposite to each other on this wheel that that you can see in the excerpt. How do those?
Is it diagonally, or because you have the four quadrants, right?
Well, or across, or so.
Okay.
For example, you've got down in the lower right quadrant, you've got the Amazon.
Okay.
Is in that fire earth quadrant. And then the Amazon's opposite across the wheel is the escapist.
Okay.
And the escapist is the woman who avoids conflict, at which we often think is, you shouldn't do that. You're supposed to lean into conflict, which is what the Amazon does. But in fact, there are many examples of leaders, and women leaders in particular, who have used that ability to sort of, they say discretion is the better part of valor, to be discreet, to be, to hold back, to sidestep the conflicts and the mess. So whereas the Amazon is, direct, head on, full force, the happy warrior, so to speak.
But I'm picturing 6 people in a room, and if they're all Amazon, then what do we have for the environment with that issue, right?
Exactly. And each type can get into can get into trouble if they are not sufficiently appreciating their opposite, the part of the stuff that they usually want to suppress. So when I say that suppressing other archetypes can hinder your growth, I really just mean that we need to understand that our strengths are also our weaknesses, that there are things that we tend to suppress in ourselves that in certain circumstances it would be better if we brought those out and help them flourish. I do agree with the whole strength-based thing, that we should embrace and use our strengths. But I really think, again, that gives women especially too much, it doesn't give us enough credit for our ability to move and bring out other strengths, other talents, other qualities that we do have in ourselves and that we can tap into if we want to grow.
Right. And so I'm hearing, though, that there's really not one best archetype, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. They're all 12 are good and can be wonderful in different circumstances.
And so based on circumstance, I think I do this a lot. So based on circumstance, maybe you're not an empath or you're not like one of these other types, but the circumstance is such that you need to try to be that to a certain extent because of what's happening around you. Do you think that women who easily morph into these different types based on what's happening around her, that's the best situation of all, if you're able to do that, be a sort of chameleon in a way? Or do you think it's more authentic to just sit back most of the time in your sweet spot or your home spot archetype?
I think I will go out on a limb and say that I do think that the chameleon approach, or the recognizing that we each contain multitudes, and we are all very well able to tap into those different aspects of ourselves in an authentic way. I think that's the best way to go. What can make it inauthentic, I think, is if we're doing it all in a kind of superficial way without understanding what are the real strengths. Like if I were to think, well, I've just got to be more extroverted, and I've just got to be more, sparkly and shiny and more like, the temptress or the Amazon, and be more feisty. I've gotten in trouble in the past for sort of lurching to the other, into my opposite shadow self, so to speak. So I don't think that's any good, but I think that when we can really appreciate the real strengths of each of these archetypes and understand how to really find them in ourselves in an authentic way, I think that's a very good way to be.
So I think what I'm hearing is be confident in who you are and what you have in terms of your strength, but be flexible depending on the situation. And, I just want to reiterate that I think this is a great book for women leaders in terms of, as you said, you're understanding the full scope of all of this. If all leaders can understand that way, it is easier to appoint team members for special projects and things where you understand the strengths and where somebody is going to be easily successful and where someone might struggle, and you need to put another team member on that particular case or project or whatever it is, right? So this all comes down to real workplace experience and things that we're dealing with on a daily basis. If you're able to understand all of these types, right?
Yeah. In fact, I have, at the end of the book, I have a list of do's and don'ts for each archetype. And it was really gratifying. A woman who, I don't know her name, she put a review up of the book for me. And she said that she had made index cards she said, I forget what her archetype was, but she said, I work for a snow queen. And this this, is another interesting way to think about these archetypes is what's your boss,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
what
That's
is
right.
she?
Not just being the boss, but who are you
Yeah.
working under and what are
Who
they
are you
like and how
working
can you
for?
be
Are you working for a
successful?
snow queen? Are you
Yeah.
working for a witch? Are you working for
Yes.
a mesmerist? And so she said she had created index cards for use in her meetings with her boss to put up saying like, remember, like don't do this, don't do that.
Well, I
So
personally think that women are successful in a business environment because we do tend to, and I'm going to make this more gender specific, I guess, but we do tend to be able to like wear several hats and juggle things very easily, And I think if I heard you say that sometimes maybe it's self-esteem or maybe it's something else, but we're put off by other styles we're not comfortable with. But if we can understand those styles, I think then you get women in a room and our creativity goes up 10 notches, when we work together, if we're comfortable with each other and
yes.
what our different strengths are. So I think that's where this book can really help folks too. So
Mhm. Yes. Yes,
I'm
indeed.
going to give you a few minutes to talk a little bit more about yourself, about your speaking engagements, your other writings, whatever you'd like to let listeners know. And then at the end of the program, we'll have some contact information for you.
Sure. Yeah, so I am a former executive in a leadership development firm, was very well known for many years, called the Forum Corporation. I was the head of R&D there. So spent a lot of time researching and understanding all things leadership.
Which was good for your archetype, right? The analytical,
Yes,
yes.
it was actually a perfect role. Yeah. And
Yeah.
being surrounded by it was a very woman friendly company. And I was surrounded by a lot of very strong and smart and interesting women that I drew upon in my research. But unfortunately, or fortunately, there was a whole regime change at one point, and I ended up being fired for insubordination, which is why this book is called Insubordinate. Because when that happened, this was 10 years ago, I thought to myself, one of these days I'm going to write a book and I'm going to call it Insubordinate.
And now you're helping all these other women,
and here
which
you
is
go.
great.
Yeah. So
That's
that
great. You do
was,
speaking engagement. You're available for speaking engagements as well with women groups and companies and things like that.
yes, available for speaking engagements. I since that time I went on to I've written, let's see, a total of 4 leadership books and 1 novel. So you can check out my other leadership books. They're all, sort of based on both history and literature and combined with contemporary stuff. So there's that. I'm continuing to write more books, and I do speaking engagements and workshops and all of that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really, truly a perfect topic for our audience. So I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll
Thank
close
you.
as I always do by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today.